Hello and welcome to the Field Guides. I'm Bill and I'm here with Steve. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Bill.
And we are also here with Dan. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Bill and Steve. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
Yeah.
I feel like a kid in a candy store right now, being out here with you two.
And folks, we want to say Happy New Year because this is our first episode of 2021.
Bill, you're slacking off.
Me? I think we're all slacking off.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But there is a reason that there's been a delay between episodes, besides the usual reason.
It's Dan's fault.
Yes. Dan,
For sure.
we lined Dan up here to come out with us because he is an expert photographer of owls, right?
I would say amateur wildlife photographer, and emphasis on the amateur.
Okay.
But,
Oh, I know plenty of amateur botanists and whatnot that are just as impressive as professionals.
Well,
well, thanks.
folks, the background story is that we had the idea to do a snowy owl episode. And in conversations with Dan, he had expressed some interest in being on the podcast. We figured the snowy owl episode would be a good way to bring him in. And we were trying to wait for a snowy owl sighting so we could all go out together, record. I could share the information that I dug up on snowy owls, and Dan could give us the experience of what it's like to go out and photograph and just experience these owls down here in their winter habitat. But the owls did not cooperate. So we've been waiting for what, probably a month?
Yeah, at least.
Something like that since Christmas a month ago.
And it is worth saying that's not the reason we haven't put an episode out.
It's part of the reason.
It's just one part of the reason, but the other part has to do with me and
more drama than we need to get into. All right, so we decided rather than keep trying to wait and keep you guys not hearing another Field Guides episode, we decided to come out here to the Erie Basin Marina. So we are out here on the first day of February.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, so almost Groundhog Day. And this is the first time we've been down here on Lake Erie. We've been to Lake Ontario.
And I was just thinking about this on the way here. We're always like, we're 20 minutes south of Buffalo, or we're 50 miles east of Buffalo. But today we are in Buffalo. Yeah.
So we are here on the shores of Lake Erie. We have the skyline of Buffalo behind us, and out in front of us we have a semi-frozen section of the lake. And correct me if I'm wrong, we're pretty much at the point where the Niagara River leaves Lake Erie.
Yes.
Correct? So for those of you listening, just think of the Great Lakes. We're kind of right-hand side, the eastern edge of Lake Erie. We're at the edge of the Niagara River where it's going to head north, go down Niagara Falls, head into Lake Ontario, and then out into the St. Lawrence Seaway, right? Mm-hmm. And we have some waterfowl here that's making use of the open water, and Dan's going to tell us exactly what we're looking at, right?
Yeah, every single one. Well, I definitely see the one that's sticking out to me is the long-tailed duck, and that's what we saw here last time. But there's some decent-sized rafts with scaup and some goldeneye, and there's other mergansers. And if you look out on that direction, out more towards the water, there's some pretty significant-sized rafts out there. But they're just they're dots from here. Can't see what they are from this distance.
Yeah.
So we came out here because, as Dan just mentioned, we were out here last Sunday, about a week ago.
Yes.
For just a hike, and we were hoping to see if any. We actually came out here to see, hopefully, the purple
sandpipers
that had been spotted here with our friend Tom Kerr. But we did get to see a snowy owl.
Yes.
Tom got one in his scope, but it was. Ooh.
More long-tailed ducks just taking off.
So I don't know if the mic picked that up, the sound of the long-tailed
It
ducks.
picked up their call, yeah. Or whatever the noise it is.
They got bored with us and took it up.
That's an actual call, or is it a wing whir, or what is
It's probably their wings, just like the mourning doves.
Yeah.
That's,
All right.
Oh, there was a diving duck just now.
yeah, that's the long-tail going.
Nice.
Formerly known as Old Squaw, right?
Yes.
Really?
I
Yeah,
think they changed their names. So how far out would you guys say the break wall is there? A few hundred yards?
Definitely, yeah.
So there's a break wall in the distance, and that's where we saw the snowy owl last time. And, we could see it through the scope, but it was pretty far out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need a pretty high-powered scope or high-powered binoculars to get a good look at the break wall. So it can be challenging, but that's been the best bet of where they've been at recently. So.
And it's kind of been surprising that we've had virtually no sightings here in Western New York for the past, 6 weeks almost, a month to 6 weeks, right?
So it's not no sightings, but it's significantly reduced, especially when you compare it to the last few years. I was telling Steve earlier, there's days where I'd go to the Buffalo Harbor, and I'd see 3 snowy owls at once. This winter, I've seen 3 total for the whole season, and
Wow.
all I do is chase after owls really in my spare time. So,
Now, we should say there were owls not far away, just across the border.
yes, yeah, there's more. If you look on eBird, there's more, and they're in similar habitats. They're right on the water's edge, just on the other side of the lake in Canada.
And since we're still in the middle of the pandemic, the border is closed to non-essential traffic, and for some reason they don't consider us essential.
This is essential.
They don't consider owl prowls essential traffic.
They're wrong.
Unfortunately. Could we take a boat? No, I guess we could because it's mostly frozen, right?
No, you didn't find a loophole.
All right, so folks, what we're going to do today is we're going to give you some background info on snowy owls, but the real reason that I decided to look into this is because we wanted to find out the answer to a mystery and see if the research out there can help us find the answer to owl irruptions. And these are irregular seasonal movements of species like snowy owls into areas you don't normally find them. So, as we often say on the podcast, for years, when I would teach people out in the field about snowy owls, I had my kind of canned information about why snowy owl eruptions occur. And as usually happens, we're going to find out that I was totally wrong.
Totally wrong? Or was it useful enough information, or was it actually just totally wrong?
There were really 2 main hypotheses about why they happen with snowy owls.
Yeah.
And I bet on the loser. So.
Got it. Did you even know about the winner?
I don't think I did.
Yeah.
No, so I was basically giving what I was taught.
Right.
But, Dan, before we get into all that, though, why don't we give a little of your background? So Dan came into the Field Guides fold because he was a former student of mine at UB, and we've kept in touch sporadically.
Yeah,
But
yeah, for sure.
I do have to admit, I have to be honest, that as my student and then now as my friend, whenever I've seen your last name, I just say Dan M.
Yes.
And you just told me 5 minutes ago, again, how to pronounce your name, but I've forgotten again. So, it's for the audience, your official name.
My official name is Daniel Mlodozeniec. And you're not the only one that struggles with this immensely, so no worries.
And what is your background?
Yeah, so I started going to UB in the environmental studies program. This is where I had the privilege of taking a wilderness course. And then I interned with Earth Spirit. That's another way we were kind of connected with our associations with Earth Spirit. And then I had an internship at Rhinestone Woods. I moved and ran a nature camp in North Carolina for a summer. Then I came back and worked with Earth Spirit. And now I'm full-time for the Friends of Rhinestone Woods at Rhinestone Woods Nature Preserve.
So you are an environmental educator.
Yes, correct.
And longtime listeners might recognize Rhinestone. We've done a couple episodes there.
Yep.
We did the witch hazel episode.
Oh, right. With Jerry.
We did fall colors there.
We did.
One of our
episode 2 or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we also did our deer exposure episode there with Kristen,
Yes.
another educator there. So glad to know that you've gone on to environmental education and that Dan is lucky enough to still have a job during the pandemic.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Support your local environmental educators. They are struggling right now. No one's bringing people into schools.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
So we should mention, though, your photography, right?
Yes, I am an amateur wildlife photographer. It's what gets me out in the field a lot. It's my, I would say, primary hobby outside of work. And I do like to chase after owls the most. So while I do focus on birds and sometimes other mammals, owls are normally what I'm going for. If I upload something else, it's usually because I went out for an owl and couldn't find one.
So where can people check out your work? You're on Instagram, right?
Yeah, so I do have an Instagram account. It's called Into the Wild Photography 2018, and there's an underscore in between each word because I was already taken up. So it's kind of obnoxious, but yeah, I post there and then just my personal Facebook page.
And we'll put that
So
stuff we'll put those links in the episode notes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
So
problem.
everyone who's scrambling to write that down, don't worry about it.
We got you covered.
Yeah, I
Love a
could
link.
use my last name in the name, so you can't complain too much.
So let's get into this. And folks, we do need to say that we're out here on the water. It is going to be windy. So we're going to try to limit the amount of noise that we get from the wind, but it's just going to be unavoidable for much of the episode. If it gets too bad, we may find another spot.
Yeah.
What do you think? Steve's looking around.
We might want to just take shelter briefly, and then we can come out again.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, folks, so we have moved to a somewhat less windy position. So let's get into it. Now, I am required by law to mention that snowy owls, they were the owl that was in the Harry Potter movie. Anytime you talk about snowy owls, you have to mention that. But really, I'm just saying that to give people an idea, just in case there's somebody out there that doesn't know what a snowy owl looks like.
Right. You know what? The chance of someone being more familiar with Harry Potter than snowy owls Yeah, that makes a
It's
lot
high,
of sense.
right?
Yeah, when I teach about them, the kids never know what a snowy owl is, and I go, "Who's seen Harry Potter? Does anyone know Hedwig, the owl?" Oh yeah, I love Hedwig.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's it.
So I did happen to find in some research, people were worried at one point that the public was going to go out and try to get snowy owls as pets because of the movie.
Oh, wow.
But
interesting.
the article did say that it doesn't seem to be the case, which is a point for humanity, I suppose.
Right.
So these birds, they are the largest North American owl by body mass.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, not by wingspan.
But they do migrate the farthest distance of any owl, and I think it's fair to say that they are the top avian predator in the Arctic. As far as where they are, they're typically found on the open tundra all the way around the Arctic Circle. Now get this, sometimes they can weather temps as low as negative 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
And we're going to get
insane.
more on that later. But during migration in the wintertime, now when we're recording, they're found in open country as far south as along the US-Canadian border, including New England and New York. Now that's during normal years. During eruptive years, and remember, we're going to talk more about eruptions later, they can move as far south as the northern half of the lower 48. Although, as we'll talk about when we cover eruptions specifically, they can travel much farther south during periods of high eruptions, or if you get a bird that's severely lost. So let's get into physical description of these guys. We already mentioned, and as Dan backed up, they're the largest owl by mass, but I wanted to compare them with great horned owls to give people an idea. As with most raptors, Steve, how do you tell males from females with most raptors? Do you remember?
The female's usually bigger,
Very good.
but I need them side by side to be able to tell that most of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
But that does hold true for snowy owls as well.
Right. So a Cooper's hawk is the female of a sharpshin?
Very good.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
We're not going to go down that hole. All right? So
our bird listeners,
yeah, they know the difference. Sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks. If you want to start a fight between two birders, just point out a hawk and say, it's a Cooper's. All right, so great horned owls. The length, if we're talking head to tail, is typically 1.5 to 2 feet. Snowy owls can be 20 to 28 inches. So at the high end, the biggest snowy owl is going to be bigger than the biggest great horned owl, but you have overlap there.
Right.
As far as weight,
Luckily, they don't look anything like each other.
Yes.
Right, exactly. But I wasn't sure when I started researching how a snowy owl compares to a great horned owl in terms of size and weight and all that. So talking about weight, great horned owls are typically only 3 to 5 pounds, which blows my mind. Snowy owls are 3 to 6, so they can be a little larger. And then you mentioned wingspan. So great horned owls, I found 3 to 5 feet for their wingspan. Again, which that blows my mind. When they fully extend their wings, it can be 5 feet.
Yeah, that's the number I got to.
Snowy owls are 4 to 5 feet. All right, so the smallest great horned owl is always going to be smaller than a snowy owl. Now, despite their name, most of them are not purely white. And Dan, back me up on this. Typically, people say males, they're mostly white with few or no markings.
Correct, and then when the males are mature, sometimes there's no markings at all, or there's less than when they're immature.
Now, I did find a study that looked at specimens at a museum in Russia. They had 129 specimens of adult males. Do you know how many had almost complete absence of dark marks? 3. 3 out of 129. So at least from that data set, it's very rare that you're going to have no or almost no markings on even a male. But females are typically more heavily marked.
Correct, especially the mature females. It'll be heavily marked.
All right, so overall they range from all white to what color are the spots, Steve, on a snowy owl?
Man, I guess I either thought they're like a black or a brown.
Right.
Yeah.
I always
black,
thought they were black, but if you look close, what are they? They're brown.
Brown.
They're really brown.
I said black or brown, but black is really, I think I was like trying to hedge my bet.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I will say in everything that I read, it would either say brown or it would just say dark.
Yes.
But there would be a few that would say black and brown. But any photograph that I looked at, if you zoomed, like it looks black, but it's like that dress, right?
What have you done?
All right, we have to edit this out of the podcast.
But if you zoom in close enough, every picture that I saw was brown. So it's a dark brown. But if there's any listeners out there that have pictures of where you can definitely see
I thought
it's
you were
black.
talking about the dress. I was like, in none of those situations did anyone say brown.
Right.
Like, you don't start something.
No, I'm not going
But
to.
the spots are brown when you look really close.
Yes,
Yeah.
on snowy owls.
Or do they call them spots or like streaks? Are they really spotted, or is it more like?
They're all different. There's
But
bars, there's
I've
spots.
heard bars
Yeah, bars.
used. I've just heard markings. They're not spots. Yeah.
I was gonna
I've
ask.
never heard them referred
yeah,
to as spots.
yeah, that's what I was about to ask. If spots is one of those terms that like I think I know what it means, but it actually has a lot of different meanings. Like it could be streaks or bars or
Right.
pure circles or.
You guys
ovals.
have me guessing now because
Yeah.
I'm thinking I saw spotting at one point.
Okay.
But looking through my notes here, it all says bars or marks or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so in mature males, the upper parts are usually plain white. Oh, it does say with a few dark spots
Ooh.
about the head.
Uh-huh.
And the tips of some primaries and secondaries. The undersides are often pure white. And as you said, there's some evidence that as males grow older, they get whiter. Now, females, they're typically, as we said, more dark markings on the breast and back, and they're often slightly barred on the crown. Now,
And they probably dye their spots when they get older.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Now, keep in mind, males can show prominent markings, but theirs will usually be lighter and not as wide. So, for example, a lot of the pictures I looked at, tail bands on males, especially when you could see them side by side with a female,
Yes.
their tail bands were thinner or were broken and lighter in color as well. And juvenile male snowy owls often have dark markings that make them appear similar to females until maturity, at which point they turn whiter. So all this goes back to what I initially said. Typically, male snowy owls are lighter with fewer markings. Females are darker. So that one we saw out here last week, we saw some markings on it, so we all agreed, it's probably a female.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's usually true, right? Where the juveniles or the young will look like the female adult.
Sure.
Similar. Yeah.
Sounds good.
I mean, I think that's true. I mean, that's a general rule of thumb, I think.
Now, there is a trick that researchers use. They look at brown markings on the wing, and although it's not foolproof, it's the most reliable technique to age individual snowy owls. Now,
Oh, interesting.
I'll get into that later on, because one of the research papers that I used that looked into eruptions, they would figure out which owls they were looking at by using this method. All right, so we'll talk about that. All right.
They don't use black light, do they?
No.
No.
So Steve's referring to when we got lucky enough to do some saw wet owl banding. Have you ever done that, Dan?
No.
So
I have
if
not.
we get the chance, we'll invite you along. But they actually use ultraviolet light on the wings of the saw wet owls
interesting.
to age them.
Yeah.
I forget.
Wow.
We can do an episode about it
We
someday.
should,
Yeah.
someday.
That'd be a good one. More owls, the better.
All right. As we already mentioned before, they can withstand extremely cold temperatures. They've been recorded in temps as low as negative 80 degrees Fahrenheit with no obvious discomfort. Now, there was one study from 1972, and this seems pretty cruel, but they actually exposed a snowy owl for 5 hours they were in what they called a metabolism chamber. So I assume from what I could tell from the paper, it was just a chamber where they could control temperature and wind speed.
Right.
5 hours they exposed it to negative 135 degrees Fahrenheit. That's
Yikes.
negative
Yeah.
93 Celsius.
Wow.
Now this was back in 1972, and I feel like the rules governing
Yeah.
how you could treat your animals were a little more lax. But it says the owl may have struggled with oxygen consumption by the end of this period. You think so? So snowy owls have perhaps the second lowest thermal conduction to their plumage of any bird, topped only by the Adelie penguin. So really just meaning how the feathers hold in the heat and keep the cold out. And it even rivals the best insulated Arctic mammals like Dall sheep and the Arctic fox. So it's one of the top insulated polar creatures, which could explain why it could withstand 5-hour exposure at a negative 135 degrees Fahrenheit.
And it's all those warm protective feathers that give it that weight that makes it the heaviest owl
Right.
in North America.
But
Right?
Oh.
crazy, it's still only 3 to 6 pounds, or
Yeah.
4 to 6 pounds.
You
right?
forget how light birds are. They look a lot more massive than
Yeah.
they
I remember hearing at one point like what the percentage of a bird's weight is. It's mostly feathers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Now, as far as the call goes, we're going to put in the sound of a snowy owl. So, Dan, have you ever heard a snowy owl?
I feel like I've heard them like just screeching defensively. A lot of times they're dive bombed by gulls or other types of raptors, but from what I've read, and probably the same with you, they're mostly vocal during like the breeding season.
Right. I have in my notes here, like Steve, they're largely only vocal during the breeding season.
At least Steve has a breeding season.
Yeah. I'm pretty loud all year round.
There was a time, though, when people described them as being completely silent. But some of the information I came across theorized that since these owls aren't chiefly nocturnal, if you think of a barred owl or a great horned owl, they rely a lot on vocalizations to communicate to the other owls around them, whereas snowy owls don't necessarily need to do that, especially since they're not in the woods. Their habitats are all open, so it's not like other owls can't see them.
Yeah.
But I mean, the flip side of that is where they live, it's totally dark for 3-4 months out of the year. So
Yeah.
you would say, well, don't they need to vocalize then? But their main call is kind of like a barking call, which I had never heard before. We'll be playing that now so people can hear it. But they do have a whole series of screeches and whistles and beak clacking, probably which they do when they're agitated.
Did you come across that they'll rarely hoot? It's
Yes.
hard to, they do during the breeding season?
I did. I couldn't find any recording of them hooting. I tried.
The only times I found one is when it's like some probably not very legitimate YouTube video with like these
Wait a
are the
minute,
owl calls
what?
in North America. Yeah, and I've heard some hooting that way, but I can't verify if that's actually a
Right.
snowy owl. So I couldn't find a legit call of them hooting.
So if anyone out there has a legit call of a snowy owl hooting,
Yeah.
send that to us, all right?
Just another birder playing recordings.
That's right. So as far as their breeding range, as I already mentioned, they're typically found in the tundra, in what we call the North Circumpolar region, so all around the polar area. And
Russia, Canada.
it makes its summer home north of latitude 60 degrees. So to give you an idea, imagine looking down on the Earth, and imagine a circle running along the bottom of Greenland, cutting through Hudson Bay, cutting off that Alaskan peninsula and over in Asia, Kamchatka, and then running along the bottom of what one website described as Europe's gun show. So that's the peninsula that Sweden and Norway is on. I
Okay.
guess if you do look at it, it looks
Okay.
like a
Okay.
curled arm.
Okay.
All right, so the breeding and distribution area of these owls, it's very small and local within that larger area I'm describing. So it's inconsistent, but the core part of their breeding range is in northern Europe, northern Canada, and northern Alaska, and then there's a few parts in northern, in northeast, and coastal Russia. But let's talk about their wintering range, because that's why we're out here, freezing our butts off, right? So many snowy owls leave the dark Arctic to migrate to regions further south. And the limits of their winter range, they're difficult to delineate given the inconsistencies of their appearances south of the Arctic. And keep in mind, many snowy owls also winter in the Arctic, although they seldom appear to do so in the same sites where they've bred. So they move around a lot.
They do.
They're tough to keep track of. And it said in a lot of what I read, it mentioned this many times. Just imagine trying to research owls during the Arctic winter. Like, conditions are just brutal, right?
Yeah.
So not just brutal, they're hazardous. So for biologists, there's very limited data on overwintering snowy owls in the tundra. And, that can include like how many are doing it and where they occur and what their ecology is during that season. So there's just a lot we don't know. It's gotten better in recent years because of satellite tracking.
Yeah.
Because for decades, like, people are just like, I don't know what the hell they're doing up there. Right? It's dark and it's cold, and we can't get up there. It's fair to say that the snowy owl is a partial and fairly irregular migrant, and it has a broad but patchy wintering range. The first-year birds, they tend to disperse farther south than the older owls.
Yeah, I read that too, and that's a lot of times they disperse, and then when the larger, more dominant, like females start to move down, they'll kick the younger or less
Right.
dominant males even
So
further south.
there's a hierarchy.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah.
the oldest females are kind of like, we get to stay here if we want to, right? And then there's the youngest males. They're like the beta.
Yeah,
They're the ones that end up in the Bible Belt.
Do they really go down that low?
They can, but it's pretty rare.
Okay.
Well, I actually
We call it the Bible pants, by the way.
My aunt who lives in North Carolina sent me the newspaper that she got that one showed up near Charlotte
Yeah.
a few years ago.
Yeah, so they can
I got
show
the
up.
actual news article. which is-
One even showed up in Hawaii, I came across.
What?
I got Florida, but I didn't get Hawaii. That's
That's wild.
They shot it. Unfortunately.
Oh, no.
Was it shotgun ornithology or just,
No, because it showed up at an airport. And
Oh,
if you
yeah.
remember our coyote episode, Wildlife Services came in, and they said they tried to use humane ways to capture it and to drive it off, but it just wouldn't leave, so they ended up shooting it. So
I still don't understand that.
if you want an interesting trip through the comment section of those articles, it's,
yeah.
people get
I'll have to look
pretty
into
fired
that.
up. Yeah, like it was hard to find exactly what went down, but
Okay,
unfortunately. Usually when snowy owls do end up in super far-flung places, at least in the articles I came across, it doesn't end well.
Yeah.
One ended up in Bermuda, and it died from eating a poisoned rat. Yeah.
No, I mean that happens here,
Yeah.
right? Or at least I know a lot of birders that claim it happens here. I don't know whether or not.
What do you mean?
Like some of the owls dying here because of poisoned, mammals like rats and stuff.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
people are like poisoning nuisance animals.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
then the owl. Yeah.
So don't use poison for mice and other rodents.
Right.
Please
Yeah.
do not.
And I don't even know. So I don't follow it close enough to know how true it is. I don't know if they're not even supposed to, or if it's totally legal to use the poison. Do you know? Do you?
I think it's still legal. I
You
just
can
know
buy
it's,
it, like-
frowned upon.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I can buy it at Home Depot.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and frowned upon, unfortunately, doesn't really mean all that much.
No, it doesn't.
I know, but to us it does.
to us for sure.
So to get back to its migration, though, even though the migration is patchy and it's regular, we can say that this owl likely covers more ground than any other owl, but many variations are known. And they often don't take the traditional north-south direction. I even came across that sometimes when winter comes, some of the females will go north.
Oh.
Like they'll have their breeding ground, but they'll winter north. And along those lines, one thing we have found out recently because of satellite tracking is that a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, but some snowy owls regularly winter in several of the northern seas. So that's why some of them will migrate north, because they'll go out onto the sea ice
Okay.
during the winter time.
Whoa.
So they use sea ice as perching sites, and then in these areas where presumably they're mostly hunting seabirds and I try to look up how to say this. Polynias, have you heard of these?
No.
Polynias, do you know what this is?
No.
These are areas of open water surrounded by sea ice.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
Hopefully I'm pronouncing it right.
So
Polynias.
it seems like it's not just like southern migration or like a lateral migration. It almost sounds more like
just scatter.
They're
They
just
just
like
go.
scatter, go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like a shotgun blast.
Run for it. Yeah.
They're all huddled up during breeding and they're like, break! They all fly. So south of the tundra, snowy owls, they're going to winter in just about any open landscape. They're often windswept sites with meager cover, which is
Yeah.
pretty much where we are.
And that's why we got the wind, folks.
That's right. So think of areas like coastal dunes, lake shores, meadows, prairies. They can be in shrubby areas. And it's generally theorized that they pick these areas because they look like the tundra.
Yep.
They're similar to the tundra.
Yeah.
One site said man-made open sites now might be even more used than natural ones.
Well, not this year really, but the last few years, especially on eBird, and I've seen them too. They love like the Batavia Airport. I think it's called Genesee County Airport. They'll even show up at
Yeah, like
Buffalo
airports.
Niagara Airport.
Yeah.
So like kind of man-made structures that kind of resemble that open Arctic landscape they'll go to, just like
Yeah.
airports and things.
So besides airports, you can think of agricultural fields, rangeland, areas of cleared forest. These are all places they could be. There's a lot of research. A great data set has been built up at Logan International Airport in Massachusetts because it's been a reliable wintering site for snowy owls for many years. So I'd recommend folks look up, I believe it's called Project Snowstorm or
Yeah.
Operation Snowstorm.
Project Snowstorm.
Very interesting stuff, satellite tracking and all that stuff. And at that airport, they seem to have come up with more humane ways to relocate owls. Because, I mean, an owl could theoretically cause problems for landing or taking off planes, right? And I think that was in Hawaii. That's why they ended up shooting that owl.
Do you guys know how they catch them?
Well, I've read various accounts of using nets, net guns.
Like I'm just imagining like our 20-foot mist nets in an open field. I'm just looking like it's like just a windswept wilderness, and then just one little
landing net out there. So one site I came across, they use Balshiatri traps. Do you remember?
Yeah.
I heard traps.
Yeah.
What I read about was traps.
Are these the Belshatri? Are they the ones that are like a half dome that's on the ground, and it's kind of like a mouse or a mouse noise inside, and there's like these little loops that they're
Yes. So there's little loops, and the idea is they come in and then get caught in the loops.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, at least that's what the ones that I've been out with, because I help banding with short-ear owls, and that was one of the things we used.
So when we talked about Belshatri traps before, what was that for? I don't remember. Maybe that was bird banding.
I think it was bird banding, and you were
Yeah.
talking about how you would capture the short-eared owls with Chuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve mentions that like once every 3-4 episodes.
Well,
Because it was such a good experience.
that is
We
such an amazing experience.
We go out at 3 a.m, set everything up, the sun will come up, and then the owls come in, and you catch a bunch. So
I'd brag about that too.
all right.
So who cares if it was 10 years ago now?
You're living in the past.
Yeah, I
man.
know. Man, that's a long time ago.
So their eruptive range, and again, eruptions occur for snowy owls when they travel farther south than their typical range. And they've been reported in all northerly states in the lower 48, so that kind of the top half of the lower 48, but as far south as Georgia, Kentucky, South Carolina, nearly all the Gulf states, and then places like Nevada, Texas, California.
Wow.
Right?
That's crazy.
Now, within the past 10 years, the winter of 2013-14, that was the largest ever recorded eruption. So at least the largest one in the past century. And that had the first snowy owls seen in Florida for decades. Now, did you guys just hear, just this past week?
Central Park?
Central Park.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was the first time a snowy owl's been there since like the late 1800s.
130 years.
Yeah, 130 years.
Wow.
Wow.
130 years. It's
That's
already
pretty
gone
cool.
though. It realized this probably.
Yeah, no, this ain't cool.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about finding food. So do you guys think the snowy owl would be a specialist or a generalist?
So when I read an article, it was considering them specialists, not generalists, and they're saying it's bizarre that they go after lemmings, which are kind of, I can't remember the exact term for it, but their populations vary and fluctuate. And
Pulsed.
normally, yes, that's what it was.
Pulsed.
Yeah, pulsed. And they're saying normally, if you're an animal that's adapted to hunting those, you're considered a generalist. So what did you find?
I read both.
You had both?
So basically when lemmings are around, they're specialists.
Okay.
And when lemmings aren't around, they'll eat whatever else is around.
Okay.
So they kind of ride the fence. Lemmings do make up the main part of their diet. And one study said they're capable of eating over 1,500 per year. That must have been a great research assistant job, right?
Can you explain what a lemming looks like?
Yes, so we're going to get into that.
Okay.
So these are, I'll jump ahead.
Do it
for
now.
Steve. All right. So they're herbivorous rodents. They're members of the vole clan. So just think
Okay.
of a big vole. So for the listeners out there, a vole, it's like a mouse, but instead of having big ears, it has tiny little ears that you can barely see, and their tail is pretty short. So think of a mouse with very tiny ears, a short tail, and they're more fat, kind of stocky. Not as cute as a mouse, right? Yeah, they're like those tubes that you try to hold on to and they just slide out of your hand. They're filled with that gel.
Oh, so they are long? They're long too?
Well, I would say that their bodies seem longer than a mouse, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I've seen like a video of a snowy owl eating one, like gulping one
Probably.
down.
Oh, yeah.
So, as I mentioned, they're members of the vole clan, and they are the predominant mammal of that tundra ecosystem alongside reindeer. They probably make up the majority of the mammalian biomass in the tundra.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're known as key architects of the soil and plant life of the tundra. Now, there's two main genera up there. There's the brown lemming. There's about 5 species of those. They're the Lemmus genus. They're found in lower, wetter habitats. And then there's collared lemmings. Those are in the Dicrostonyx genus. There's about 8 species. They're found in more dry, higher elevation habitats. So it's generally agreed that there appears to be no what they call synchrony, or happening at the same time between the brown and collared lemmings of their peaks. And we should say, people probably have heard of lemmings because lemmings going off cliffs, right?
Yes. That's how I heard of them
Yeah.
years ago.
Like, don't be a lemming, right? Don't follow the herd. So is that
Yes.
true? What do you think?
I feel like when I first heard it years ago, I looked into it and found some truth behind it, but it was years ago. It's probably Wikipedia or something.
Right.
So I'm not sure.
Now, hang on, don't knock Wikipedia necessarily.
Yeah. So I thought I heard it wasn't true, and it might have been a sin of the crew that ran them off the cliff.
You're right.
Yeah.
So it's not true. What does happen with lemmings is they do go through these population fluctuations where sometimes their populations will peak to such a degree that there will be localized mass migrations. Now,
Right off of cliffs.
Well, when these things are happening, it's possible some could get knocked off a cliff.
So their population gets so big, it just keeps inching closer and closer
Right.
to a cliff, a nearby cliff.
Yeah,
and then
that's horrifying.
some just fall off. Yeah.
Some just get knocked off. But it's not purposely going off the cliff. But there was a Disney movie that apparently this cultural idea can be traced to, where the filmmakers kind of made this happen through editing and kind of driving the lemmings.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah. So that just kind of wedged itself into our cultural consciousness.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, lemmings
Weird.
don't do that. So the feeding access of snowy owls, since there's these population fluctuations in lemmings, it's irregular that they have access to these guys. So it's likely that they can alternate between these two lemming types as one increases and the other decreases. But researchers, this is an area of further study, they're saying maybe these big eruptions happen when both populations peak at the same time. Both populations of lemmings and food is abundant.
And you said the peaks between the two genera of lemmings they're independent of each other.
Correct.
So if they happen to peak at the same time, it's sort of unrelated.
Correct.
Yeah.
And as far as we can tell, even within genera, that's not happening at the same time, like geographically speaking. Just because they're peaking, say, in Quebec, northern Quebec, doesn't mean they're going to be peaking in British Columbia.
Right. And I hate to back up, especially if it's something that I missed.
Yeah.
I know you said that they're kind of vole-like,
Yeah.
but I know you said one genus was called the brown lemmings. Are
Yes.
they actually brown, or are they white? Or
No, they're brown.
they are all brown. And then
Yeah,
the
they're
collared, what does the collared look like? Like, are they also brown with like a...
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I didn't go that far.
For some reason, I was picturing them being white, but I'm sure I'm thinking of a different mammal that I've seen an owl eat.
So we'll post some links to pictures of
Okay.
lemmings for people that want to know. But
Sounds good.
for now, just think of like something brown and furry and fat, and about 5-6 inches long.
And what's their like habits like? Do they just live under the snow?
Like a vole.
Or- okay, so
They're going to be subnivean
Right.
when there's a snowpack.
got it. That's kind of what I was wondering, because I know with voles and mice around here, sometimes you'll even catch it. I remember I used to walk to the library every day, and sometimes, like, because there'd be those big snow drifts on the side of the road, I would see like a mouse scurry really quick, but
Or vole.
Or vole or a mouse, I guess, scurry really quick, and I could see it just barely under the snowpack.
Right.
It was like, it would just be when they pop out for a second and go back in. It was actually really, really cool, because I'm like, I didn't expect to see this right around Buffalo, just walking along a street.
And shout out to our subnivean layer episode.
Oh yeah.
That's a great one. So the snowy owl's biology, it's closely related to these critters. And sometimes if there's not enough of them around to feed baby owls, the adult pair won't lay eggs until the supply improves. So even though, we say that they're specialists on lemmings, but they can be generalists, their breeding success in the global population is really tied to the availability of lemmings in the tundra. So we can't just say that they're strict generalists, because the populations of snowy owls do really seem to be tied in some way to the populations of lemmings.
And it kind of sounds like when you're talking about these eruptions, that seems like it's more tied to the lemmings. Right?
Yes.
Will they experience eruptions?
Don't give away too much yet.
Sorry. I'm just connecting the dots.
You are. That's good. That's good. But put a pin in that.
I'll put a pin in it.
Yeah. All right. So just to give you some idea of how much of their diet is lemmings, there was one study on Southampton Island. So this is an island in the north end of Hudson Bay, and they studied the diet of snowy owls. 97% of the diet was lemmings. Okay. And then in Barrow, Alaska, they did a study over 25 years looking at over 42,000 cumulative prey items. Nearly 100% of that was lemmings. So
Wow.
again, can you imagine those researchers? Lemming. Lemming.
Well, I can imagine it, because I basically did it. What I had to do for our project was we collected owl pellets from these roosting areas that the short-eared owls would go to, and then we'd bag them and dissect them pellet by pellet. And it was basically like, because you had to look at the molars because you'd find skeletons inside there, and it was basically like vole, 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 vole. I did get a cardinal beak one time,
wow.
which was really, really cool. But
Made a cardinal beak super exciting, right? But let's talk about generalists, and I would say this probably shows up more in their winter diet. In non-breeding season and occasionally during breeding season, snowy owls can adapt to almost any available prey. So some examples of this. In coastal Oregon, did I just say Oregon? In coastal Oregon, they looked at 62 winter pellets, and from 75 prey items, their main food, black rat.
Oh.
Yeah, that made up about 40%. Then red phalarope. Does that count as a shorebird, phalarope? I think it does.
I don't know.
That was about 31%. Bufflehead make up 19%.
Whoa.
And then in coastal southwestern British Columbia, there was 139 prey items, 100% avian. So almost all water birds, mostly snatched directly from the surface of the water.
Wow.
So do you remember I mentioned Logan Airport is one place they're studying them?
Where's that?
In Boston.
Okay.
So in one study, they looked at 6,000 pellets. They did find meadow vole and brown rat predominated. But they even found some of them that ate Canada goose,
Yeah.
herring gull,
What?
great blue heron.
Why are they going for the biggest things?
Because they're Bubo. They're the bad owls.
That is serious that an
Yeah.
owl could take down a
Wow.
great blue heron. Like, I'd be afraid of a great blue heron.
Yeah, that's amazing. But even still, a goose?
Right.
A goose,
That's
great
true.
blue heron.
Canada geese are pretty.
And what was the third one?
herring gull?
Herring gull, which is
Pretty
like
big.
the biggest
Significant
gull that
size
I know
gull,
of.
yeah.
Is there a bigger gull in our area?
Yeah,
What about
I've
blackback?
seen
Great
great
blackbacks?
blackbacks, and
Yeah.
I think they're the biggest in the world.
Okay,
I
we've
believe.
definitely, we see those periodically here. So.
And then they're also eating, thankfully, house cats, and striped skunks.
How dare you?
I know. How dare you?
Keep them inside.
Keep cats inside, folks.
Yeah.
Thank you. One thing I came across that I found interesting is that, they do these studies of pellets, and that's one way that they figure out what owls are eating.
Mm-hmm.
But one study did mention that when snowy owls take larger prey, they tear it apart. They usually remove the head first, and then they eat the large muscles, and the remains are typically scattered. So this could lead to significant under-identification of feeding on these larger prey animals as opposed to smaller prey, which they just eat whole.
Right.
I'm like, wow, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
Like, you would really need to be able to watch the snowy owl almost continuously to get a real clear idea of what they're eating.
Mm-hmm.
While we're on that, let's talk about hunting. So we know that owls typically have incredible sense of hearing, right? But snowy owls seem to be the exception to that. So they're typically visual hunters, which would make sense for where they are.
Yes.
They're not in the woods.
Yeah.
So, like, there it is.
They're in open fields. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some evidence that they can detect prey 1.6 kilometers away. That's 0.99 miles.
Wow.
So roughly 1 mile. So, Dan, how do they typically hunt?
I've heard there's the perch hunting, so that's the most common method where they'll go on a perch such as like a utility pole or a fence post or even like the ground too at a higher elevation, and there they'll scope for prey and then they'll attack. But I've also heard of ground hunting where they're almost just kind of hopping about on the ground, searching for prey. And luckily the owl that I last encountered on Christmas this year, I got to watch this owl do both.
What was it hunting?
So I was
Wow.
reading about it. It was in a farm field in Lyndonville, so I'm thinking some type of vole, but I think it was like a cut down cornfield, and then there was almost like, it looked like an irrigation ditch in the middle, so perfect habitat for small mammals to go in. And he was running around, and I know they don't really hunt by ear, but the owl was also doing kind of when they circle their heads, when they do that a lot to triangulate where it's coming from. Now, I didn't read that they use their hearing to hunt, but I was watching this owl do that triangulation motion with its head. So
Well, I haven't read that they don't use their hearing at all.
Yeah.
I just don't think, because some owls can hunt without seeing at all. They
Yes.
just totally use their ears. But I imagine their ears still do help
it's
somewhat.
probably a combination of both.
Yeah. And then they also do the snow plunge, hunting into the subnivean layer.
Yes.
So, but I would imagine that they would have to see something go in before because I can't imagine they can hear the way like
Great
fox
gray
could
owl
hear. So great gray owls, can they hear into the subnivean
They can.
layer? Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
When you talk about like the hearing abilities of owls, the great gray owl is usually the poster species for that.
Oh, okay.
Its ability to hear, voles and other creatures under the snow.
Wow. So I did come across up in the Arctic that it's possible for snowy owls to fast for 40 days, up to 40 days off of their fat reserves.
Biblical.
Yeah. Seriously. So they have this extremely thick layer of subcutaneous fat. It can be 3/4 of an inch or more thick.
Wow.
So up in the Arctic, if it gets extremely cold or conditions just aren't right, they can just fast for 40 days for a bird, which blows my mind.
Yeah.
But it's likely that this is how they overwinter, the ones that stay in the Arctic. They rely on these fat reserves to survive. And then during these periods, they will enter, while it's not a torpor, they're definitely more lethargic, and they won't move around as much, so they're reserving energy.
I wonder how efficient birds are with digestion. Sometimes I wonder about that, because obviously you think about a bird's heartbeat, and it's like,
Oh, yeah,
and-
their metabolism is probably a lot faster.
Right. So I wonder if there's less waste. I wonder how much more I don't know anything about this, but I'm just wondering if they can build up these fat reserves and then
Yeah.
they're able to survive 40 days.
That's a future episode.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it'd be worth thinking about. So.
So let's talk about reproduction, right? What does a snowy owl nest look like?
What I came across and what I've seen was typically on the ground, not real like structure, not like you would think like a bird nest on the ground, kind of just a mound on the ground, and they often line it or surround it with lemon carcasses.
Right.
Yeah.
So
which is pretty interesting.
they really just make a scrape. And there is a picture, I'll put it in the episode notes. There's a picture from Quebec in that high eruption year, like 2013, where it was completely ringed by 75 lemmings.
Like a complete wall, no holes in the wall. All lemons.
You just imagine, and they just line them up so neatly.
Yeah.
It was beautiful and kind of gross.
It's kind of Shrike level disturbing.
Shrike level.
So they don't, as you said, they don't really build a nest.
No, which is normally typical of owls. They
Right.
just kind
And
of find a place.
The one thing that I said, it says no owls build their own nests. So is that like, I did a quick search on that last night because going over my notes, like whenever there's something that says this never happens like this way, I'm like, is that really true?
You know, the lemmings actually die in a circle.
I've never encountered literature or any sighting in the field that indicates that they do build their own nests.
Yeah,
It's
so they're
always
just using
they're taking over others, or the cavity nesters are just taking over a hole
They're the
built by a
bastards of the
woodpecker or
owl
something.
world.
Well, that's the advantage to nesting early, and you don't have to build your own nest.
Dibs.
You can take them. I know, dibs.
I'm taking this one. So, as we said, they don't really construct a nest, but they construct a scrape. And I found one account that said one female snowy owl took about 3 days to construct a scrape. I'm like, what are you doing for 3 days? Good Lord, that's a long time to make a scrape.
Perfectionist, that's all.
I guess so. So they do lay a large clutch of eggs. I found anywhere from 3 to 16.
Yeah, that was mind-boggling to me.
But on average it's 7 to 9.
Yeah.
So, and as we already mentioned, when food is plentiful, they tend to lay more eggs. And again, right on the ground in that kind of circular bowl scrape.
How many survive?
How many young survive?
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
I'm just curious, like if they're, let's say on an
How many
average
lemmings
year,
are there?
they're laying 8. Do all 8 fly off?
Yeah, I did not find like survival rates. I imagine
Yeah.
it's hugely variable.
Yeah, I don't have any like specific answers, but I was reading that there can be a decent difference in the growth rate of them. Like since there's so many eggs being laid, the first egg will be laid significantly earlier than the last egg, so that the first chick that hatches is able to grow more and larger. And typically in owls, like the ones that's like really small, they kind of get muscled out. Yeah, they kind of get muscled out from the food. So maybe that means that there's a high mortality rate, at least for the younger ones, but I don't know.
So maybe mortality increases the later the egg hatches.
Yes,
maybe
so something
within a
who
clutch.
knows? Yeah.
But I did find, I found one reference. I cut it out, but you brought it up, that in snowy owl nests, often the older chicks will help just incidentally incubate the younger chicks. Like before they hatch, they'll help incubate those eggs because they're big enough where their body heat is actually doing something.
Wow.
There's also been found that geese, ducks, and shorebirds of several species gain incidental protection by nesting close to snowy owl nests.
Oh, that's so cool.
Now, the snowy owls will sometimes kill and eat the young and adults of those birds, but there's a trade-off.
Yeah,
Like,
that's the price you
I
pay.
Gotta
might
risk
die,
it to get the biscuit.
but they might protect me from something else. Now, I did find on Wikipedia and several other sources that aggressive encounters with parent snowy owls are said to be, in quotes, genuinely dangerous. And one resource has claimed that the snowy owl is the bird species that has the most formidable nest defense display towards humans.
Oh,
So
really?
I read this and I'm like, all right, I gotta look into this.
Yeah, for sure.
So I spent an hour or two maybe looking into this. I could not find any incidents of people actually being attacked by snowy owls.
That kind of makes sense. So I mean, where they're breeding is so far north. How many people are actually going out in the Arctic tundra to go
Right.
mess with snowy owls?
Exactly.
But I've seen videos of them like driving off, like wolves and foxes and other creatures.
Yeah,
So-
there were lots of references to that, driving off predators.
Yeah.
But one website, I thought it was funny, they said, the first sign of an impending snowy owl attack may be when you feel their sharp talons scrape the back of your head. Like, that's not an impending attack.
that is the attack.
It's happening.
That's the
Punch
first
KO.
attack.
Yeah.
Right. Or when you see a large angry bird flying straight at your face or head. Like, wow,
That's when you know one's coming.
this is great advice.
Yeah, you know you're about to get punched in the face when a fist makes contact with your cheek.
You may be in a fight. right. So the next part of my notes here, it does talk about the caches of lemmings around a nest, which I just thought was cool. I'd never heard of owls doing that before.
I've heard of other owls doing that with maybe feathers and things. I've never heard of them using like dead rodents to do so.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
I
crazy.
agree with you with that one.
So one record said there was more than 80 lemmings on one nest, and that the female, she usually doesn't start hunting until the oldest chick is about 3 weeks old. But one reference actually said that sometimes the females don't need actually to hunt. If the males are successful enough, they can just kind of pick up the voles right there.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm
Pretty sweet.
wondering if the that aggressive nest behavior towards humans, it was just an author's note. The author was like counting 78, 79. Oh!
An angry owl's flying straight at my face or head.
Oh, talons on the back of my head.
All right, so let's talk about taxonomy.
Oh,
This is
yay.
Steve's favorite, right? All right, so Dan, you seem to know, what is the Latin name of these guys?
Bubo scandiacus is what
Okay.
I got. Did I pronounce that right?
I think so. I was going to say scandiacus, but Latin is a dead language, so there's no one
Yeah.
here to tell us we're wrong.
I believe I listened to an audio recording before.
There you go.
It's-
Must be
I
true.
don't know. Yeah.
All right, what does that mean?
What I found for scandiacus was Scandinavia, originating
Right.
from Scandinavia. And then it was a little bit harder to find Bubo. The only answer I really found was it just means owl.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
that's what I found too.
I was trying to look for the origin of the word too, and they're saying the Bubo kind of sounds like the hoot that they make, and I'm like, I don't know
That
about
sounds
that.
like
I
a
know,
stretch.
I don't know about that. I'm like, I think it just means owl. Let's go with that.
So Linnaeus, in his 1758 Systema Naturae, did I say that right, Steve?
I don't know.
You don't know? He actually listed the males and the females as separate species.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Which I thought was weird. But he had the male as Strix scandiaca, which means Scandinavian screecher,
Okay.
and the female as Strix nictia, which means night screecher. But right now they are a member of the true owl family, and it's not quite as bad as trying to identify a Cooper's hawk or a sharp-shinned hawk, but over the decades, I found at least 3 different scientific names. So there's
Yeah.
been a lot of debate about where this owl should be.
3 is nothing. You should
Well, I know,
you
I
should
know.
research plants.
Right, but for birds, right?
And the family is Strictidae, or is that a different? Or am I getting that
Strigidae.
confused? Strigidae.
yeah,
Okay.
Strigidae.
Yeah,
So that's the
Strigidae.
true owl family.
Yeah.
So until recently,
Oh,
the
who's,
snowy owl.
sorry, I'm interrupting you.
That's okay.
Who's not a true owl? Is that a barn owl?
Barn owls.
Barn
Yeah,
owls.
so
They're
if,
the-
when
they're
you
the
divide
freaks.
the strigiforms by orders, there's like the typical owls and then barn owls.
Yeah,
Got it.
They're the freak, right?
They're the freak.
Yeah.
Sound like one.
And what's their family? Do you know? What's their genus?
Is it Titanidae for the
That sounds
family?
right.
I think that's
Sounds
what it is.
right.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
That sounds
It's
good.
been years since I've thought about it, but
Out there in the world somewhere, someone's listening to this and they just had to pull over. 'cause
yeah.
like, no!
I think that's it. I probably just butchered the pronunciation.
We'll put it in the episode notes.
Yeah.
So they were, for a long time, they were the sole member of a distinct genus. But DNA sequencing, lovely DNA,
Yeah.
it's shown that they're very closely related to the Bubo horned owls.
Yes.
So they diverged about 4 million years ago, and they're most closely related to the great horned owl. So you'll still see, I found a lot of websites that basically said, oh, they're still being debated, but it's mostly debated on osteological distinctions. Do you know what that means?
Nope.
Like bones.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Bones. Something about like the
Yeah,
hip
osteo.
area bones. Some people are saying, well, look at that, it doesn't fit. And I just feel it's like,
That's old fashioned.
right, like I feel like
Yeah.
the DNA people are like, look at the DNA.
Yeah,
And then
I
I'll be
feel
like,
like
but
that
look at the bones! And they're like, look at the DNA.
I think DNA trumps everything
Right.
else.
Right.
Yeah.
They're like, it's DNA. I do have to say, the other day someone posted a bottle of water and it said non-GMO water. And they
That's-
just had to point out,
The
like,
good stuff.
water doesn't have genes. There's nothing to modify.
Yeah.
It's not an organism.
Yeah, somehow they were able to modify all the bacteria
Yeah.
genomes that were in there. Yeah.
All right, so do you guys know how long snowy owls can live for?
I'll just take a guess. 20 years.
That's a good guess.
25.
25, there you
25.
go.
Okay.
So typically in the wild we figure about 10 years, right? But 25 seems to be in captivity, about how long they live for. It can up to 30. One in the wild, it was banded in Massachusetts, possibly its first winter, and then it was recovered dead in Montana 23 years later.
Wow.
So that was a badass snowy owl.
That's incredible.
Mhm.
All right, so let's talk about how they're doing. So do you know how they're doing, Dan? Like conservation-wise, like
I've read a couple things. Some of them were, I think it was like vulnerable is what I came across.
Yeah,
So
so-
not like they're endangered, but they're not great.
so for a long time, we figured snowy owls were doing well, but again, these guys are hugely nomadic. It's hard to kind of keep track of where they are throughout the year. They're difficult to survey.
Yeah, and I would just assume that they're doing fine because when I think of them, like I think of areas like Russia and Canada and areas like that, and that's just like a whole lot of habitat. You know what I mean? Like it's not like high density of people up there, right?
But think about climate change.
But climate change.
What's happening up there, right?
Yeah.
So
I guess, I mean, I don't know how much.
So up until about 10 years ago, the estimate for the number of snowy owls was anywhere between 2 and 300,000 in the world, which sounds good. So that was from two groups, the International Union Conservation for Nature, IUCN. They have the red list. They're kind of like the standard, the gold standard.
Right.
But then also Partners in Flight. Have you guys heard about this group?
I don't know.
Partners in Flight, it basically covers all of North America and South America, but it's really the US and Canada that kind of drive it. It's a cooperative effort of all these partnerships with federal, state, local government agencies, as well as foundations, organizations, conservation groups, and even industry and academics and private individuals, all these people working together to look at birds and their conservation status. I'll put links in the episode notes to them. But Partners in Flight and the IUCN, they kind of said they're probably doing pretty well. But within the past 10 years, these two groups, using more recent data, they've really discovered that all prior estimates were extremely excessive. And that now, estimates say there's probably only between 30 and 60,000 snowy owls globally. And during lemming declines, when the populations are low, the number of nesting females may drop down as low as 1,700 worldwide.
Wow.
So it's a dangerously low number. Now that's
it makes
breeding
me think,
females.
Right. But it also makes me think that they're like what we call an effective population size.
Right.
Which doesn't completely reflect their actual population size. It more reflects the variability within the whole population.
Right, especially genetic health you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Because even if you have a bunch, if you don't have that genetic health, that's a serious problem.
Yeah, like if they're all so inbred, you know, then their effective population size would be really low. Even if their population numbers were really high, then they're just more susceptible to changes in their environment, and they won't be able to adapt.
It can lead to the coolest named but worst ecological process, the extinction spiral.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So it's estimated that their numbers are less than 10% of what they once were. So due to this, in 2017, just 4 years ago, the IUCN upgraded them to a vulnerable species. So just here in North America alone, in the past 50 years or so, their population has dropped, it's estimated about 64%.
Wow.
So they're in trouble. And as I already alluded to, climate change, it's widely perceived as probably the primary driver of the decline. Because just imagine, as temperatures rise, there's going to be factors like increased rain and reduced snow. That's going to have a huge effect on the lemmings, right? And then in turn, the snowy owls.
Right.
So then the other issues related to that, it's going to modify migration, vegetative composition, that's going to be altered. That's going to affect the lemmings. And remember, the lemmings are going to affect the vegetation. There's going to be increased insect, disease, and parasite activities. And then snowy owls could also suffer from hyperthermia.
Oh, too warm?
Too warm.
Too much, their metabolism too high?
Because imagine, these guys are adapted to these extremely low cold temperatures,
right.
And this past summer, remember, up in Siberia, that one town hit, 100 degrees Fahrenheit?
What?
Yeah.
Dang.
These are all matters of concern. And then we also talked about how they can hunt off of the sea ice, if there's no sea ice. That's kind of a problem.
Yeah.
Right? So evidence of these ideas, it seemed to play out in Greenland when the lemming population collapsed there from 1998 to 2000. During those 2 years, the lemmings numbers declined quickly. They dropped from 12 per hectare to less than 2 per hectare. And this resulted, well, at least it was correlated with a 98% decline in owl productivity.
Wow.
All right, so that, folks, that was my introduction to snowy owls.
Oh my God.
I love it.
Now, I don't know what we're doing on time. We're going to have to check this. So this may be the spot where we separate this into 2 episodes.
It's been over an hour.
Is it?
Easily. Well, the last time I looked was 54 minutes, and that, remember how I broke it into
All
2
right,
already?
This would
So,
probably be a
Time flies when you're having
exactly 1 hour,
All right.
plus whatever was happening before.
So we may have to cut this into 2, most likely. So this is a good spot to mention a sponsor.
Oh, yeah.
right?
So this episode is brought to you by Gumleaf USA.
That's right. Makers of fine rubber boots.
Mm-hmm.
And back when Gumleaf first contacted us about being a sponsor, they were kind enough to share some boots with Steve and I.
Yep.
And we have put many, many miles of use into those boots. So we got to say they're the finest rubber boots I've ever had.
I mean, as someone that's had to use them for, work a bunch, I wish I had these back then.
Yes.
Now I just wear them for fun. I wish I had them when I had to wear tall rubber boots for the job. But they're great. They're made of 85% rubber, so they can bend up to 1 million times.
That's what it says in the literature. Well, I should say that's not what it says in the literature. That's what it says in the company literature, right?
There was a study about Gumleaf boots that some independent organization did.
But we can back up. They can bend a lot without cracking or breaking. And they've been kind enough to give a special offer to Patreon members, supporters of this podcast. If you are a patron, you can get free shipping on any Gumleaf order. That code is available on our Patreon page. So check out gumleafusa.com.
Yeah, so, I mean, I hate to game the system here or let you guys know how to do it. The shipping is more expensive than even a single month of patronage to the podcast.
There you go.
If you're already planning on buying some boots, just become a patron for, a short amount of time. And
save yourself some money.
Yeah.
In the short run.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll do our official wrap-up, I think, at the end of part 2.
Yeah.
All right, so where we thank all our patrons and go over our thank yous and all our orders of business. But right now, we are going to head over to Tifft Nature Preserve and possibly another site where we might catch some snowy owls. So stick around for part 2.